Welcome to the SAFeTY Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFeTY Program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. All right, everybody, do I have a treat for you today? I'm really super excited about this one. So I am happy to have the ladies with the ACT project at Humane Canada on today's show. So I've got Sue and Andrea and Claire, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But just by way of a little bit of background, so the ACT project, it stands for Awareness, Collaboration, and Tools. And it's aiming to address systemic barriers to help with safety planning, support services for women and for animals, companion animals, farm animals, service animals, and those experiencing gender-based violence. So they're in the process of building this online learning center with education, with resources for survivors, as well as the general public. So I'm excited to hear what is happening, what is going on, because I go way back with Barbara Cartwright. Before you were all known as Humane Canada, you were Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, and that's how far back I go with Barbara. So I just want to welcome you all to the show. And Sue, I'm going to kick it off with you, and if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with Humane Canada and this program.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Allie, for having us on. I am the current manager of the ACT project at Humane Canada. I come to this work as a survivor with lived experience, and I was really fortunate to have support services when I was leaving a violent relationship, and that drove my passion to want to work in the sector of gender-based violence. So then I worked in gender-based violence services, specifically managing an emergency crisis shelter and then community services for survivors. And then from there, I was so lucky to be able to land the position of ACT coordinator with Humane Canada. And then our previous manager, Jasmine Ferreira, who's a PhD candidate at York University and really built the foundation of this project. When she moved forward, I was fortunate enough to become the manager. And so I'm currently doing a master's in women and gender studies, and I've just finished my master's of education. So that's how I come to this work.
Oh my goodness. So that's amazing, because that's quite a background that you have. Thank you. Just really helps you understand what's going on in this field. So can you just give us kind of a broad outline of what is Humane Canada? What are y'all doing?
Absolutely. So we are Canada's Federation of SPCAs and Humane Societies. We represent more than 50 humane societies and SPCAs across Canada in every province and 2 territories. And like you said, we were originally known as the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, but the name has actually been changed to Humane Canada to really reflect our vision of a Humane Canada for all animals. Our mission is to end animal cruelty, improve animal protection, and to promote the humane treatment of all animals. So our organization is comprised of very dedicated and passionate staff. Beyond the ACT project, there's work being done on things like criminal justice reform, policy advocacy, and research, with the goal of making Canada more humane. So I do want to note, because many of Humane Canada's members investigate and enforce animal cruelty sections of the Criminal Code, we do have frontline knowledge of the violence link, which is the relationship between violence against people and violence against animals. So within Humane Canada, we have the Criminal Justice Reform Program, which works to raise awareness about the violence link and to support legislative and policy amendments that will create lasting change in Canada's animal welfare landscape. So we also have the Canadian Violence Link Coalition, and then that's connected with our project, the ACT project. So we work with the Canadian Violence Link Coalition to address those systemic barriers, like you mentioned, for survivors with animals experiencing gender-based violence. And so we've been really fortunate where our work has given us that really in-depth and rich understanding of gender-based violence from an animal welfare perspective. And it also just intersects with so many other issues and challenges that survivors face, like access to housing as a basic human right for humans and animals.
So your Canadian Link Coalition, I know that you all have gotten to know many of us in the National Link Coalition. Yeah. So like I've been on the steering committee of the National Link Coalition since its inception in 2008. And I'm now on their board of directors, which that's a new thing for them. And, you know, we follow the work that you all are doing, and it is impressive, the mobilization that you all have done to really raise awareness of, you know, animal abuse does not happen in a vacuum. And when there is domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, it's, you know, I always say violence is violence, whether it's against a two-legged or a four-legged family member. When you have any form of abuse in a home, you have an abusive home, period. So yeah, it's just so amazing what you all are doing. So Andrea, I'd love to know a little bit about your background and, you know, what are you doing with the ACT project?
Sure. So I can introduce myself. My name is Andrea. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a registered social worker and one of the ACT project coordinators with Humane Canada. Prior to my work with Humane Canada, I was a frontline social worker. So I worked for over 7 years with a lot of variety of marginalized communities. And a common theme that I saw working on the front line was the systemic barriers that each of these groups faced. And so I wanted to go back to school. I got my master's in social work from the U of T. And during that time, I was also a practicum student with the ACT project. So that was my first introduction into it. So then I graduated, and now I'm back as the coordinator, supporting the ACT project and the great work that this team does.
So what are the primary things? Like if I were to ask you about your day-to-day with the ACT project, like what is it that you're honing in on right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I specifically wanted to work on the advocacy piece. So as Sue mentioned, there's a lot of intersections that we see with the systemic barrier of like accessing housing for not only women and survivors, but also women survivors and their animals. So for the whole family. So what we see across Canada, there's not really clear practices in terms of like housing and sheltering that is accessible by the whole family. So I'm working on creating a report for the Federal Housing Advocate on these specific concerns and including the survivor stories that we've had the privilege to gather and hear and to hold. But we're also including case studies from the partners and organizations that we've worked with to really create a singular narrative as to like, why do we need housing for survivors and their animals? Why do we need to create more accessible, appropriate, and safe housing?
So are you working on like the traditional domestic violence sheltering as an issue, or more transitional housing, like once a survivor is able to get out of emergency sheltering and go into transition? Are you working on both of those, or focusing on one?
Yeah, I'm looking at both of those because there's so many barriers that come out at each stage of trying to access not only shelter, but then more permanent housing. Unfortunately, we've heard stories of women who've had to choose between going to shelter without their animal, without their family, and choosing not to do that. So, I've heard a story of a person who ended up sleeping in their car with their animal because who wouldn't choose staying with their family? So yeah, trying to really create more of a response within like access to shelter and housing.
So here in the US, we have an issue with transitional housing. It's hard to find affordable housing, rentals, that sort of thing. Are you experiencing the same thing in Canada?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. The housing market, depending on where you live, I know in like the larger cities like Toronto, BC, it's very expensive, very unaffordable, very inaccessible. So I believe that's why the Housing Advocate was created. And I think there's a lot of stories in there that aren't being told. And, hearing these stories, I think it's our responsibility to amplify what people are experiencing because we do have the platform to do that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are unaware that there are survivors with pets living in their cars because they either their time has expired at an emergency shelter, or they cannot get into shelter with their pets, and that's their only other option that they have. So all right, so Claire, I want to come to you, and then we'll keep talking about this. But I'd love to know about your background and what is it that you're bringing to this project?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Claire. My pronouns are she, her. And I came to the project really with an animal welfare background. So I have a master's in animal behavior and welfare. And I really came here with a robust passion for kind of that intersection between animal welfare and human welfare. So I worked at a humane society all throughout my undergraduate, and I had the privilege of helping to provide accessible veterinary care to folks that really wanted to take care of their animals. And we also provided a free pet food delivery program as part of a COVID-19 relief effort. So I really developed a passion for, developing initiatives that help to keep animals with their family, and helping to develop those kinds of community supports. So I came to Humane Canada as a part-time coordinator for the National Pet Food Bank. And I now am fortunate enough to be part of this project as well. So I coordinate this project as the other half of my job. And yeah, I'm so grateful to get to contribute to this work. And both projects really go hand in hand. So it's a really wonderful connection.
So what's at the top of your list every day? Like tell us what your main thing is that you're working on.
Sure. My audio cut out for a moment, but I believe you asked the top of what I'm working on right now. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So I am kind of focused on our educational building block at the moment. So we really are working to reduce barriers for survivors that are leaving violent situations and trying to access safety planning. So a big part of that is helping to educate not only the animal welfare sector, but the human social services sector and the general public, and provide resources that will help develop pet safekeeping programs without having to reinvent the wheel, because there are so many folks doing such amazing work already. And so a lot of the time, this kind of stuff gets kind of pushed to the side of someone's desk, and it's really hard to make it a priority for staffing reasons and for funding reasons. And so what we're really working on with our educational building block is that we want to provide an online learning center so that folks can come to the online learning center really from anywhere, from the general public, from animal welfare, from human welfare, and take our free online learning asynchronous modules to help them learn about how they can develop these kinds of programs in their community. And also download all kinds of tools and resources that can help them with the programming as well. And we also have our community of practice. So I help to coordinate a quarterly meeting that we hold really for professionals and champions in this space to come together and listen to guest speakers talk about a specific topic, and have a really great networking opportunity among each other. So yeah, that's a big part of my work as well.
That's amazing, because I mean, it really comes down to education in this area. And that's the big thing that I have noticed, you know, with my program, Sheltering Animals and Families Together, that it's easy to initially say, we don't have the money, we don't have the time to do this. But once they learn about it and realize that it can be very simplistic, once they do implement on-site housing at a shelter, they're like, why haven't we done this since the beginning? So it's that sort of education. So, I mean, if you need anything from the SAFeTY program, you know, you can come to me, and, you know, I'll make it happen.
We will probably take you up on that.
Yeah,
you.
Yeah, because the SAFeTY Startup Manual is there specifically for shelters. You know, it is a grant-funded program for us to provide it to domestic violence shelters at no cost, and all they have to do is go to, you know, safetyprogram.org and request it, and I will pop it in their email box, and it'll help them through it. And sometimes that's the first step, is just understanding, you know, all the, you know, parts and pieces of it, and that it is not that overwhelming. It's not that hard to do. So I love that. I love that you're doing that sort of education, so that they can know what's going on.
I do want to add, with your SAFeTY manual, we have been promoting it widely in Canada.
Yes.
And that is
Good.
one of the pieces of work that we don't want to recreate. We want to promote it. So we're looking at what's missing and how can we build resources that don't already exist.
Oh my gosh. Can I give you an idea of something that's missing? And I seriously cannot get anybody to take on this project, and don't even ask me to take it on. I don't even want to go there. So like you said, there's already a manual of how to house pets on site at a domestic violence program. It's done. Nobody needs to replicate the wheel. What we need is a manual for how to house animals off site. It hasn't been done.
Yeah, that is an area that we certainly want to touch on. Sue, I'll let you take it away.
Yes.
So
can you talk about that?
I can, and I actually want to touch upon one of the amazing partners of the ACT project, which is the Saskatchewan SPCA. They have created a guide for animal safekeeping that is really extensive and so well done. And if you contact their Family Ties coordinator, Laura, she will share access to it. So we can definitely share her email with you, Ali. And we will also be highlighting this resource in the ACT newsletter. So for folks that are interested, we do a quarterly newsletter that we just try to put as many resources and education pieces into. And so we hope folks sign up so that they can hear about not only the amazing things that we're doing at the ACT project to help folks plan for hopefully sheltering animals on site, but also making plans for off-site safekeeping programs, but also the incredible work of our partners, because there's so many folks that are doing this work and are creating amazing things. So we really just want to uplift their work as well.
Yeah, I was literally just having this conversation the other day that we desperately need a manual with policies and procedures and forms for the offsite housing, because I mean, me coming at it as an attorney, as a former prosecuting attorney, I find that there's so much more liability housing the animals offsite than there is on site, because the domestic violence shelter, they are hunkered down, they have their policies, they have their security and safety, but when you take them offsite, that's where it can get a little dicey, and it needs to be addressed. And I get asked all the time about it, and it's like, that's not what my program is about. You know, I advocate for on-site, but at the same point, there are times that you have to put the pets off-site, you know, at a vet clinic, a boarding facility, foster care, animal shelter. And so yeah, I'm so glad that, you know, Saskatchewan SPCA has done some work in that. We definitely need something, because, you know, what happens in Canada happens here in the US, happens in, you know, I was just in Portugal, it's happening there, it's happening in Italy and England, and having that sort of resource can be so beneficial. And I mean, it's kind of like a wraparound project. Like we just come at it from all different directions and make sure that everybody in the center is safe. So yeah, I would love a little more information on that. I've done a lot of work with Saskatchewan SPCA and their PATHS program with their domestic violence shelters. So Sue, on that note, what percentages of domestic violence in Canada allow pets on site? Do you have a number?
So unfortunately, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but what I do have, and what I'd love to share with folks listening today, is the website SAFeShelter.ca. It is an incredible website offered by Women's Shelters of Canada, which is another partner of the ACT project. And they actually, ShelterSafe.ca, I hope I said that correctly. They have an incredible map where you can see what shelters offer animal safekeeping programs, and they divide it by on-site and off-site. And it's kept very up to date. So I apologize for not having the percentage, but I do encourage folks to check out that website, because they also offer information about other services that are offered by shelters in areas, which is really helpful for folks that may have additional needs or want to connect with different communities.
I'm glad you mentioned that website. So I have that website linked to the SAFeTY program listing of shelters. And when it comes to Canada, I don't even pretend to keep up. I just link to that. You know, there are some that I know of, but you are so right that that website is updated so frequently. I am not going to replicate the wheel at all. And so I just have that as a link on my website. And I do love the map that they have where you can click on a province and then it lists all the shelters and it tells you, you know, pet friendly, offsite, onsite. Such an amazing resource for Canada. And it kind of helps light a fire under me to keep my list up to date, which is not as easy as it sounds to do that. So, I mean, I asked you for a percentage, but do you just have like a raw number off the top of your head? Like, do you know if there's 50 pet-friendly shelters, 500? Do you have an idea?
Unfortunately, I apologize. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but what I do know is it is growing. And I can say that because as we've been growing across the country, we've been finding folks that are just getting programs started, or they're starting to get into a phase where they've had a program, they've piloted it, and now they're actually advertising it to folks in their communities. So that, I will say, is the other sort of tricky piece about sort of having a rough number is we've been talking to folks across the country, and one of the barriers is oftentimes these programs are not funded over the long term. So oftentimes organizations will very quietly launch programs and only tell survivors if they ask, as a way of being able to maintain sort of a program running with limited funding. So that's sort of another barrier and why there needs to be sustainable funding sources for folks that are doing this very much needed work.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I look, and I need to go back in and check to see what updates they've made, but there were pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. There was at least one in Alberta. There was a bunch in British Columbia. There was quite a few in Ontario. There was one in Saskatchewan. That took a while to get them on board, and when they came on board, I was doing a little happy dance in my office. It's like, yeah, the training works. It's amazing. So I definitely know that Canada has been growing in this area, which just thrills me beyond belief. I mean, just absolutely thrills me. So, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to share, there's actually 2 now in Saskatchewan that I know of for sure. So that is, we're definitely growing.
See, I just get so excited because that is so needed. So yeah, I mean, you guys are growing just as fast as in the US here. And I was just in Portugal teaching at a LINC conference and talking about, on-site pet housing, and really held up a lot of your shelters as a model, showing them, hey, look at what's happening here, look at the photos, look at what they're doing. And yeah, it's just to really influence, because this, my program is not just a US program. It is a global initiative. And that's why I love working with Canada. I mean, I'm in Michigan. I literally can just drive 2 hours and I'm across the border in Ontario. So, I'm super close. So, Andrea, what agencies and organizations are you most working with? Are they more national based? Are they more, province? Are they local? Give me an idea of what you're working with.
Yeah, so it's kind of all over the map. We do have quite a few national, provincial, regional, municipal organizations. I believe we have over 40 partners currently, and they really represent all of that. I think the project initially started with some lead project partners that had worked with Humane Canada in the past on other projects, with the exception of Women at the Center, which is a survivor-led organization. But they've worked with us very closely and have opened a lot of doors for us in that work with survivors and making sure that throughout this project, we're centering those voices. I think that has been a really big priority of the project, is centering those survivor voices and their stories. But yeah, I can't really say that there's one that's been majorly, because it's been a really, part of the name of ACT is collaboration. So it's truly been this collaborative effort and consultation that we sought out to make this really intentional and meaningful.
So is there one particular collaboration that maybe you're working on right now, or you were working on, and just kind of give us an idea of who came together and what did you all do? What did you all work on to accomplish?
Sure. So we had, I can't speak to just one because we had multiple consultation roundtables with various stakeholders. So one roundtable, for example, was focused on the Indigenous community, and one organization was the Native Women's Association of Canada that came to this table, and they shared considerations for us to look at when we were creating the Act to Keep Families Safe model. So, I mean, there's a lot of standout collaborators, but I think it's not something that we can do with just one partner. It's definitely something that we have to really get a diverse range of voices to inform the work that we're doing, because there's a lot of considerations that we have to look at. And, other tables we were looking at people and organizations and survivors that lived in rural and remote communities, and living in those situations can bring up a lot of very different challenges for survivors. Another roundtable we had was with official minority language communities. Is that right? Yeah. So again, it is hard to say if there was one specific one, but I think again, we just wanted a really diverse range of voices to inform our work.
Yeah. And, when I look at like rural communities, in particular, I mean, that's a lot of Canada. That is a lot of Canada. You don't have Toronto everywhere. It's, you just have a lot of farm areas, rural areas. And I remember it was probably 10 years ago, a really powerful study came out of Canada that was looking at rural and farming communities and, the barriers that survivors have in those areas. I actually cite to that study to this day in my presentations that it's not just about the remoteness of where they live. They can't access services. They may not have the ability to travel, and they have farm animals that they want to take care of. So it's different working with the smaller rural shelters versus the big metropolitan areas. It's a different dynamic. Have you also found that same dynamic?
Oh, definitely. Another concern that comes out of that is the confidentiality piece of it. So if a survivor does try to seek help, who can they go to, right? Because everyone knows one another in such a close, tight-knit community. But we are trying to respond to those challenges through the education piece of the ACT project. So we will have an online learning center and a module that is specifically focused on supporting rural and remote communities and the survivors that live in those communities. So we will have like subject matter experts speaking to those challenges, and hopefully people can learn a bit more about the specific struggles that these communities face and how to address them.
Okay. So Claire, the animal protection groups, what is the main focus that you all have with them to, kind of bring them into the loop and really blend animal and human protection so that they're not acting in silos anymore?
Yeah, for sure. That silo situation is definitely a huge barrier that we've been wanting to address. And animal welfare and animal protection are a big piece of those stakeholders and those project partners that Andrea was mentioning, one of those many voices. I'll say a big piece of that is really encouraging a trauma-informed approach when it comes to enforcement and animal welfare. We really want to bring everyone into the loop of supporting survivors with a trauma-informed approach. And so looking at it in a way of how can we help to keep the people with their animals. We know that victim blaming can be a really difficult, really impossible barrier to overcome for lots of survivors. And so we want to encourage in the animal welfare sector for that not to be a barrier, and how can animal welfare folks work together and collaborate with human welfare folks to encourage this work. Because even like in the rural situation, we know, like you mentioned, farmed animals, not very easy to move. So if we can get animal welfare folks on board and have that collaboration, we need their expertise in caring for specialized kinds of animals sometimes. And so a lot of a lot of enthusiasm so far that we've received from that sector. It's been wonderful, the collaboration that we've seen. And we've heard from them that this is a really needed support. The barriers are very similar for them, though, I will say, a very, budgeting and labor limited often. So we're happy to be able to support those kinds of initiatives.
What about veterinarians? Are they excited to, help the animals that are hanging out at a domestic violence shelter? Are they getting on board and understanding the message of all of this?
I think so. We have heard lots of success stories about human welfare organizations, so domestic violence shelters collaborating with veterinary services and even animal behavior professionals and helping to give animal behavior assessments and help to inform domestic violence shelters about animal care, about animal health, animal behavior, so that the folks doing that work, working with the people, can really be prepared and do that work safely. So yeah, absolutely. I would say that has been a successful collaboration so far. Could always be more in every sector, of course, but veterinary services are a huge piece.
Yeah, and I always say, as part of the SAFeTY program, that it is never for a domestic violence shelter to become animal experts. They need to lean on their animal professional partners. Everybody's got a job to do, and if they work together, in the end, we're all working on the same homes to try to help. And if they work together, it's actually going to make their jobs easier to do that. So my cat Stella decided to make an appearance. I've literally been pushing her head down. It's like, Stella, stop. She's kneading in my lap. Let's just say her claws need to be clipped because I'm probably bleeding at this point. So
we're in favor of those kinds of interruptions in this organization.
There is not, I pretty much do a Zoom every day, either a class or something. There is not a moment that I do not have a cat interrupting. So this is normal. So I'm glad she's here for you. So
we are too.
So anyway, okay, I'm going to come back around to all of you. And just, Sue, is there anything else that you would like to share about the work that you're doing before we wrap up? Because I could seriously sit here and talk to you guys for hours, but is there anything else that we should know about your work and maybe how people can support it, even if they're not in Canada?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to give a really quick shout out to some researchers that were foundational to being able to even have this project, which that's Dr. Rochelle Stevenson, Dr. Amy Fitzgerald, and Dr. Kendra Coulter. They have been foundational for us to even be able to be where we are today. So big shout out to them. We really encourage folks to go to the website. So it's humanecanada.ca/act-project. On that website, you can sign up for our newsletter. Our online learning center is launching in October. We encourage you to check that out and share it widely, because the best thing we can do is offer folks education resources, tools, case studies, so that they can take those to their communities and come up with those creative, innovative, community-based solutions.
And I will share in the notes, I will share all the links so that everybody has easy access to that, and we'll definitely get that out there.
Thank you.
That's amazing. So Andrea, anything else that we need to know about this great work that you all are doing?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Sue is saying. Something that I realized when coming into this project is that we're not starting from scratch, and that it's thanks to survivors, to individuals like you, Allie, to organizations, communities, that you've really paved the way for us to do this work. And just, I'm feeling very grateful leaving this podcast. And if people want to reach out, Sue had mentioned the website, and feel free to contact us if you want to learn more about the project.
Yeah, and I love seeing the crazy idea that I had 20 years ago grow. And I will never forget, it was 5 years ago. I was in DC, and we were getting ready to actually federally fund some, domestic violence pet sheltering programs. And one of the ladies called me the grandmother of the domestic violence pet movement. And I'm like, grandmother? Can we call me the godmother and not the grandmother? I don't think I'm that old. So instead of the godfather, I'm the godmother. So yeah, I love seeing this expand through Canada, and what you all are doing is just, I'm just speechless about it. You are making such a tremendous impact. So yeah, so thank you. So Claire, anything else on your end that we didn't cover that we need to talk about?
I think we've touched on a lot of it. I'll mention our social media just in case. I don't know if you mentioned it, but we're at Humane Canada across all social media platforms. And like Andrea said, there's really always room at our table for more. So if you want to collaborate with us, if you want to join in on our community of practice, if you want to learn more about our learning modules, resources, anything, or if you just want to talk about the project, we love talking about the project. So yeah, if we can, we'll provide you with an email, I guess, that we can link, but please feel free to reach out to us.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. And I mean, people can also support your work. I mean, people love to donate at the end of the year, and it's always, I'm a big fan of supporting other organizations. So yeah, definitely, for those who are watching this, if this speaks to you, I mean, definitely support this. This is what is needed. It needs to grow.
And I do want to say that our project's actually funded really generously by WAGE, which is Women and Gender Equality, which is a federal funder in Canada. So I actually would really encourage folks to donate to Humane Canada's amazing programs, as well as other gender-based violence shelters and animal welfare programs that are funding and running these programs, just because we do have a very generous funder that I want to shout out as well.
Oh, I'm so glad that you did that, because it's not every day that programs have generous funders, and they can literally say, hey, send the money in this direction. It's going to be used in that way. So that, I love hearing that. That is fantastic. So, all right. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming on here, and always thrilled to see what Humane Canada is doing, this new ACT project. And, if you need anything from me and Sheltering Animals and Families Together, you know where to find me. You know where to find Stella. So she's just going to sit here in my lap until I decide to not work anymore. So this is her way of saying, you're done, even though it's only like lunchtime here. So anyway, I will definitely put all the information in the show notes, and I will let you know when this is ready, and you can share it across your platforms, and let's get the word out about the great work that y'all are doing.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right. I will talk with you all soon. So definitely stay in touch, and you can count in the SAFeTY program, whatever you need, just count us in. All right. Take care.